Good evening, and welcome to the Night Cafe. Or perhaps is it good morning? At this hour, the line blurs, doesn't it? A time when the city holds its breath and the spaces between seconds seem to stretch on a little too long. You've come in from the quiet dark, seeking something more than just coffee. You're here for the stories that drift in with the lonely souls and the night owls. The tales that cling to the steam rising from your cup and whisper in the rustle of a turning page. We traffic in the peculiar here. The little oddities that get caught in the corner of your eye. The thoughts that snag on the edge of sleep. Tonight, we have a special collection for you. A trio of curiosities pulled from the deep, dark roast of the witching hour. So settle in. Take a sip. The world outside can wait. For the next little while, we invite you to lean closer and listen to three strange tales for a night like this. Good evening. You've found your way back to this peculiar gallery and cafe, where the mundane often wears a rather unsettling mask, and the artifacts of our modern age whisper tales best left to the shadows. Tonight, we direct your attention not to a canvas or a sculpture we have on display here in the cafe, but to a seemingly ordinary item of apparel. This, my friends, is the traveler's companion, though some who have brushed against its influence might call it by other, less comforting names. For Mr. Arthur Finch, a man whose meticulously ordered life was daily assaulted by the chaotic tyranny of the morning commute, this driving glove promised an oasis of calm, a path of effortless passage through a world that seemed designed to obstruct him. But some paths, you see, once taken, lead to destinations not found on any map, and the companion that smooths your way may be guiding you to an isolation more profound than any traffic jam. We invite you to observe Mr. Finch's final, perfectly unimpeded journey. Arthur Finch was a man who worshipped at the altar of order. His life, as a senior auditor for a firm that prized meticulousness above all else, was a testament to this devotion. His apartment was a symphony of straight lines and muted colors, every object in its designated place, every surface gleaming with a sterile perfection. His days were governed by schedules, his thoughts by logic. Yet this carefully constructed sanctuary was violated twice daily by an ordeal that frayed his nerves and chipped away at his very soul, the morning and evening commute. The city, a sprawling, indifferent beast, seemed to conspire against him. Traffic snarled with a malevolent intelligence, red lights bloomed with infuriating predictability, and other drivers, a barbarian horde in his estimation, flouted the rules of the road with a reckless abandon that left Arthur trembling with suppressed rage. Each journey was a descent into a purgatory of noise, frustration, and wasted, irretrievable minutes. He yearned for a way through, a path of serene, unimpeded progress, a restoration of the order that the city so cruelly denied him. He sought solace not in companionship, for which he had little aptitude anyway, but in the quiet, dusty corners of antique shops, where the relics of more ordered, perhaps more civilized times lay sleeping. It was one such establishment, the Gilded Cage, a dimly lit antique emporium presided over by a woman named Mrs. Evangeline Thorne, whose eyes held the unsettling depth of ancient wells and whose smile was as enigmatic as the object she purveyed that he first encountered the glove. It lay alone in a small velvet-lined box, a single black leather driving glove, exquisitely crafted, its surface worn to a soft, buttery sheen. A small, tarnished silver insignia, an endless coiling knot, was embossed on its back. A traveler's charm, perhaps, Miss Thorne had muttered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves, from an era when journeys were different. Some say it finds its own way, or clears it. The price was negligible. Mrs. Thorne seemed more interested in Arthur's almost reverent fascination with the object than in any monetary transaction. "It has been waiting for a particular hand, I believe," she had said, her dark eyes glinting. Back in his meticulously ordered apartment, Arthur examined the glove. It was for the right hand. The leather felt strangely warm, almost alive, conforming to his touch, as if it recognized him. The next morning, more out of a sense of curiosity than any real expectation, he slipped it on before starting his dreaded commute. The moment his gloved hand touched the steering wheel, a peculiar calm settled over him. As he pulled into the usual snarl of morning traffic, something extraordinary happened. Cars that had been aggressively jockeying for position seemed to part, creating a clear lane for him. Traffic lights, with an almost prescient timing, turned green as he approached. He found himself navigating complex intersections with an effortless, almost intuitive grace, his usual tension replaced by a serene, almost detached sense of control. The journey, which usually took a nerve-shredding hour, was completed in a tranquil 20 minutes. He arrived at his office feeling refreshed, invigorated, his usual commuter scowl replaced by a faint, uncharacteristic smile. It was no fluke. The evening commute was the same. Day after day, the glove worked its silent magic. Arthur's stress levels plummeted. His work improved. He felt a sense of power, of mastery over the urban chaos that had once tormented him. The glove became his indispensable companion, his secret weapon against the frustrations of the modern world. He began to notice other, more subtle changes during his glove journeys. The city, while still recognizable, seemed quieter. The usual cacophony of horns, sirens, and construction noise was muted, distant. The other cars on the road, those that didn't seamlessly part for him, appeared older, their designs subtly out of sync with the current year. Their drivers, when he caught a glimpse, were pale, indistinct figures, their faces always turned away or obscured by shadow. Then the routes themselves began to shift. Sometimes he would find himself driving down familiar streets that were inexplicably deserted, devoid of other traffic, devoid of pedestrians, as if he were the sole occupant of a silent, sleeping city. The sky above, on these phantom lanes, always seemed to be a perpetual, unnerving twilight, regardless of the actual time of day. Buildings he passed by looked subtly different. A familiar shop might bear an older, forgotten name. A modern glass skyscraper might be replaced by a crumbling Victorian edifice he had never seen before. Time itself became fluid during these journeys. An hour-long drive might feel like mere minutes, or a short crosstown trip could stretch into a timeless, dreamlike passage. He would arrive at his destination with no clear memory of the specific route taken, only a lingering sense of effortless, gliding motion. A prickle of unease, the first he'd felt since donning the glove, began to disturb his newfound serenity. He tried, once, to make his commute without it. The experience was a nightmare. The traffic seemed more aggressive, the red lights more malicious, his own anxiety more acute than ever before. He fumbled, made mistakes, nearly caused an accident. Halfway to his office, trembling and sweating, he pulled over and slipped the glove back on. The world instantly smoothed. The chaos receded, and the familiar, unnerving calm returned. He was addicted to its power, terrified of facing the road without it. The isolation of his glove journeys deepened. He rarely saw other people on his routes now, and when he did, they were always the same pale, silent figures in their antiquated cars, fellow travelers in this strange twilight dimension. He began to feel a kinship with them, a sense of belonging to this hidden, effortless world, even as his connection to his own, real life grew more tenuous. His colleagues at work commented on his increasingly detached demeanor, his distant gaze. His meticulously ordered apartment, once his sanctuary, now felt like a temporary stopping point between his journey on the phantom lanes. The glove, when he wasn't wearing it, lay on his bedside table, the silver insignia seeming to gleam with a faint proprietary light. One evening, as he drove home, the twilight deeper, the silence more profound than ever, he saw a figure standing by the side of an otherwise deserted stretch of road he didn't recognize. It was Mrs. Evangeline Thorne, the antique shop owner. She was not looking at him, but at the road ahead, her thin lips curved in that same enigmatic smile. As he passed, she slowly raised a hand, not in greeting, but as if to acknowledge a fellow traveler on a well-worn path. Arthur knew then, with a chilling certainty, that the glove was not merely clearing his path, it was drawing him onto a different road entirely, a road that existed alongside or perhaps beneath the one he knew. A road for those who sought an escape from the friction of the world, a road that led elsewhere. He considered trying to fight it, to discard the glove, to face the chaotic reality he had once so despised. But the thought filled him with an unbearable terror. The phantom lanes, for all their unsettling emptiness, were now his only reality. The serene, effortless passage they offered the only peace he knew. His final journey began like any other. He slipped on the glove, its leather cool and familiar against his skin. He pulled out into the perpetual twilight. The city around him was a silent, ghostly tableau. The pale figures in their old cars glided past, their faces unseen. He felt no fear, only a profound, weary acceptance. He drove for a time that could have been minutes or centuries, the landscape outside his windows shifting, blurring, becoming less and less recognizable. The buildings grew more ancient, the roads more overgrown, until finally the city dissolved entirely, replaced by a vast, unending expanse of twilight, misty plains, the road stretching before him, straight and empty, to an unseen horizon. Arthur Finch never arrived at his apartment that evening. He never arrived anywhere in the world he had known. He simply drove on. Perhaps, if you find yourself stuck in an inexplicable traffic jam on a gray and frustrating afternoon, you might catch a fleeting glimpse in your rearview mirror of a solitary, antique car gliding effortlessly through a lane that isn't quite there. Its driver, a pale, serene figure, his right hand, gloved in black leather, resting lightly on the wheel. Do not try to follow. That path is not for you. It is the phantom lane, reserved for those who have paid the driver's due, their journey endless, their destination a perpetual silent passage into the unseen. And Mr. Arthur Finch, the man who craved order above all else, has found it in the perfect, unimpeded, and eternal commute of the damned. And for our next tale, here in the Night Cafe, consider, if you will, this particular canvas. It depicts an elderly man, gaunt and pale, slumped in a high-backed armchair in a cluttered study. His eyes are vacant. On a small table beside him, an exquisitely detailed miniature figure of the same man in the same chair sits pristine and perfect. Next to it, an ornate clockwork automaton of a craftsman at a tiny workbench, its metallic eyes seeming to gleam with a cold inner light. The man is Colin Penright, a man of taste, of discernment, a collector. And like many collectors, he was driven by a singular passion, a quest for the unique, the perfect, the ultimate acquisition. Tonight, we invite you to observe Mr. Penright's final pursuit. The object of his desire? A trifle, really. a toy. But some toys, as you may discover, play their own games. We call this one the miniaturist. Colin Penwright lived in a house that sighed. It was a grand old Victorian, a relic of a more prosperous era in his family's, and indeed, his own life. Now the intricate gingerbread trim was flaking like sunburnt skin, and the once proud turret sagged with a weary resignation. Inside, the gloom was a permanent resident, dust motes performing a silent, ceaseless ballet in the slivers of light that dared to penetrate the heavy velvet drapes. Much like its owner, the house was a study in diminishing grandeur. Colin, in his late 50s, possessed the kind of pallor that spoke of too many hours spent indoors, poring over auction catalogs and meticulously polishing the treasures of his past. His collection, his magnificent, breathtaking collection of antique clockwork automatons, was his only solace, his only remaining claim to significance that life seemed determined to strip from him. Each brass gear, each painted tin limb, each glass eye that stared with a fixed, unblinking gaze, was a testament to a time when his name commanded respect, when his bids were decisive, when his presence at an auction house caused a ripple of anticipation. Now his funds were dwindling, like sand through an hourglass whose turn was nearly complete. The invitations to exclusive viewings had become infrequent, then non-existent. Yet the hunger remained. More than a hunger, it was an ache, a gnawing void that only one thing could fill: the acquisition of a masterpiece. A final crowning jewel for his collection that would echo his name through the annals of connoisseurship long after he was gone. It was from a disreputable source, a nervous little man named Finnegan, who dealt in whispers and rumors as much as in antiques, that Colin first heard of it. The miniaturist, Finnegan had hissed, his eyes darting about the shattered corners of Colin's study as if the very walls had ears. A legend, Mr. Penwright. From the Black Forest, they say. 18th century. Johann Schweitzer, the clockmaker. Mad as a hatter, of course, but a genius. They say his creations, they weren't just copies. Colin, initially dismissive of Finnegan's usual nonsense, found his interest piqued. Go on, he urged, his voice a dry rasp. This automaton, Mr. Penwright. Finnegan leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and desperation. It doesn't just make miniatures. It captures them. Perfect, they say, down to the last mote of dust, the faintest blush on a painted cheek. Indistinguishable from life, only smaller. The seed was planted. The miniaturist. The name itself resonated with a promise of unparalleled artistry. Colin's obsession, never far beneath the surface, bloomed with a feverish intensity. He delved into obscure horological journals, ancient guild records, and the rambling correspondence of long-dead collectors. His dwindling savings were channeled into this singular pursuit, inquiries dispatched to shadowy contacts across Europe. His few remaining social engagements were forgotten, his meals often skipped. The grand, sighing house became his research library, his prison, and his command center. The trail was cold, littered with dead ends and charlatans eager to prey on his desperation. Weeks turned into months. The dust in his study grew thicker, the shadows deeper. Colin himself seemed to shrink, his clothes hanging looser, his eyes acquiring a haunted, restless gleam. He was a man consumed. Then, a letter arrived, bearing a postmark from a forgotten, grimy district of the city he rarely frequented. The stationery was cheap, the handwriting spidery and archaic. It was an invitation of sorts. Regarding your inquiries into the Schweitzer piece, it read, Elias Thorne may be of assistance. By appointment only. Discretion assured and expected. Elias Thorne. The name was unfamiliar, Yet it carried an unsettling resonance. Colin, clutching the letter, felt a tremor of both excitement and trepidation. This was it. He could feel it. Thorne's establishment was not so much a shop as a mausoleum of forgotten things. Tucked away in a narrow, cobbled alley that smelled of damp earth and decay, its grimy window displayed nothing but accumulated layers of city soot. The bell above the door emitted a discordant jangle that seemed to awaken ancient dust spirits. Inside, the air was thick, cloying, like breath held too long. Mountains of objects, tarnished silver, chipped porcelain, eyeless dolls, stacks of leather-bound books whose pages had fused together, rose towards the gloom-shrouded ceiling, creating narrow canyons through which Colin hesitantly navigated. "Mr. Penright, I presume?" The voice emerged from the deepest shadows, dry as autumn leaves skittering across a tombstone. Elias Thorne materialized, a figure as ancient and layered as his wares. He was impossibly old, his skin like parchment stretched taut over a skeletal frame. His eyes, milky with cataracts, seemed to look through Colin rather than at him. A long, greasy apron covered his frail form. "You inquired about the miniaturist," Thorne stated, not asked. His voice, though faint, filled the oppressive silence. "I did," Colin confirmed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You have it?" Thorne gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It is particular. Not for everyone." He gestured with a skeletal hand towards a curtained alcove. "It chooses, in its way." The price Thorne named was staggering. It was everything Colin had left, the final remnants of his inheritance, the sale of his last few bonds. It meant the grand house would soon follow its owner into irretrievable decline. But Colin, standing on the precipice, saw only the prize, the miniaturist, his legacy. "I'll take it," he said, the words catching in his dry throat. Thorne's lips, thin and bloodless, stretched into something that might have been a smile or perhaps a grimace. "It requires understanding, Mr. Penright. It takes its work very seriously." The miniaturist was presented on a faded velvet cushion. It was smaller than Colin had imagined, no more than 12 inches high. An exquisitely detailed figure of a craftsman, perhaps Schweitzer himself, hunched over a tiny workbench. The figure was carved from dark, polished wood, its miniature tools rendered in gleaming brass and steel. Its tiny glass eyes, the color of obsidian, seemed to possess an unnerving depth. There was no visible winding key, no obvious mechanism for its operation. "How does it work?" Colin asked, his voice hushed with awe. "It observes," Thorne whispered. "Place an object before it. It will comprehend, and then it will create." Back in the suffocating silence of his own study, Colin placed the miniaturist on his grand mahogany desk. The house seemed to hold its breath. With trembling hands, he selected his first subject, a ripe red apple from a bowl on his sideboard. He placed it carefully on the miniature workbench before the automaton. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a series of clicks so faint they were almost imperceptible, the miniaturist stirred. Its tiny wooden hands moved with an impossible, fluid grace. Miniature tools were selected, employed with uncanny precision. There was no sound of carving or shaping, only the faintest whirring, like the beating of insect wings. Colin watched, mesmerized, for what felt like hours. Slowly, impossibly, a perfect replica of the apple began to form on the tiny workbench. The blush of its skin, the slight imperfection near the stem, even the way the light caught its polished surface, all were duplicated with breathtaking fidelity. When it was done, the miniaturist became still. Beside the perfect thumb-sized replica, the original apple still sat. But Colin frowned. It seemed duller, Its vibrant red had lost some of its luster. Its aroma was fainter, almost tired. He picked it up. It felt subtly lighter, its flesh less firm. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, a consequence of his own overwrought imagination. His excitement mounting, he chose his next subject, a prized porcelain bird, its delicate wings outstretched in perpetual flight. He placed it before the miniaturist. The process repeated, the tiny craftsman, whirring and clicking, its obsidian eyes fixed on the figurine. The replica was, once again, flawless, a perfect jewel-like miniature of the porcelain bird. But when Colin examined the original, his blood ran cold. A hairline crack, so fine it was almost invisible, now snaked across one of its delicate wings. He was certain, absolutely certain, it hadn't been there before. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He tried again, with a wilting rose from a vase. The miniature it produced was vibrant, its tiny petals imbued with a dewy freshness the original had long since lost. The original rose, however, when he touched it after, crumbled into a pile of dry, lifeless dust. A pattern was emerging, a chilling, undeniable truth seeping into Colin's consciousness. The miniaturist wasn't merely copying, it was draining the originals, siphoning their very essence, their vitality, their being, to imbue its creations with their uncanny perfection. Elias Thorne's words echoed in his mind. It takes its work very seriously. Days turned into weeks. Colin, caught in a horrifying fascination, continued to feed the miniaturist. A silver locket, a miniature portrait of his grandfather, a cherished leather-bound first edition. Each replica was a marvel of verisimilitude. Each original was left subtly diminished. The silver tarnished beyond polishing, the portrait's colors faded, the book's pages brittled, and its spine cracked. The room where the miniaturist resided grew colder, the air heavier. Colin felt its tiny obsidian eyes following him, a silent, knowing gaze. His own vitality began to wane. A persistent weariness settled deep in his bones. The house around him seemed to accelerate its decay, mirroring his own decline. The gas lights flickered more erratically. The floorboards groaned underfoot with a new, mournful cadence. He was now a ghost in his own home. His only companion, the silent, industrious automaton, and its growing collection of perfect, lifeless effigies. One gray, drizzly afternoon, Colin stood before the portrait of his beloved deceased wife, Lenore. It was his most treasured possession, a vibrant oil painting that had captured her warmth, her gentle smile, the intelligent light in her eyes. He was losing everything. His fortune, his house, his health. Perhaps, just perhaps, he thought with a desperate, twisted logic, the miniaturist could preserve her beauty, her essence, in a way that time and memory could not. He could keep her perfect, forever. With trembling hands, he carried the heavy portrait and propped it before the miniaturist. The automaton began its work. This time, the process was agonizingly slow. The clicks and whirs seemed more deliberate, more focused. Colin sat, unmoving, watching as the tiny craftsman painstakingly recreated Lenore's likeness. When it was finally done, the miniature portrait was breathtaking. It was Lenore, captured in all her youthful radiance. Her smile so real, Colin felt his heart ache with a love that transcended grief. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the cool, smooth surface. Then he looked at the original. A strangled cry escaped his lips. The vibrant colors were gone, replaced by a dull, muddy palette. The warmth in Lenore's painted eyes had vanished, leaving them hollow, vacant. Her smile was a ghostly grimace. It was as if her very soul had been leached from the canvas, transferred into the tiny, perfect replica. The portrait was now just a husk, a faded memory of what it once had been. Colin sank into his chair, a broken man, The miniaturist had given him perfection, but at what cost? He had sought to preserve beauty, and in doing so had destroyed it. He looked at his hands, thin and papery, the blue veins prominent beneath the translucent skin. He felt the chill of the room seep into his marrow. A strange, unsettling thought began to form in his mind. A final, desperate gamble. His collection was almost complete. His legacy? What would it be? A madman in a decaying house, surrounded by stolen beauty? Or perhaps there was another way. To be preserved, to be perfect, to become part of the collection itself. With a final surge of desperate energy, Colin Penright rose. He moved his high-back armchair directly before the miniaturist. He settled into it, arranging his thinning hair, smoothing the lapels of his worn smoking jacket. He looked directly into the obsidian eyes of the tiny craftsman. "Observe," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Observe and create." The miniaturist stirred. Its tiny hands moved. The faint whirring began, a soft, insidious lullaby in the suffocating silence of the grand, sighing house. The gaslight in the study cast long, dancing shadows. The air is still, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something indefinably old and cold. On the grand mahogany desk, the miniaturist stands, its work apparently complete. Next to it, on a small velvet cushion, sits a new addition to its collection, a perfect, exquisitely detailed miniature figure of an elderly man in a high-backed armchair. His name is Colin Penright. His posture is one of serene dignity, his tiny, painted eyes fixed on some distant, unseen horizon. A faint, almost imperceptible smile plays on his miniature lips. He is, at last, a permanent part of the collection, perfect, timeless. In the full-sized armchair, slumped and still, is what remains of the original, a hollow shell, devoid of light, of warmth, of essence. Just another forgotten object in a house full of them, slowly surrendering to the encroaching dust. The only movement in the room comes from the miniaturist itself. As the last light of day fades outside the grimy windows, its tiny, obsidian eyes seem to glint, just for a moment, with a cold, satisfied light, waiting, perhaps, for its next commission. For there are always those who desire perfection, no matter the price. Always. Well, fellow travelers, it seems the cafe's pull is strong tonight. You have an undeniable appreciation for these curiosities of fate. Very well, let us unveil one more piece from the collection. This is the maestro's measure, a tool for rhythm, for discipline in the chaotic world of artistic creation. For Mr. Julian Ross, a composer whose ambitions soared far beyond his erratic talents, it promised a structure, the relentless pulse needed to bring forth the symphony he felt burning within him. But some rhythms, once set in motion, govern more than just music. They can dictate the very tempo of a life, and the final silent beat can be a devastating one. We call this composition of despair the cadence of clay. Julian Ross was a man haunted by melodies unfinished, by symphonies that existed only as fragmented, frustrating whispers in the cacophony of his undisciplined mind. He possessed, he believed, a rare and profound musical genius, but it was a wild, untamed thing, lacking the structure, the relentless rhythm to be brought forth into the world. His small, cluttered apartment, overflowing with crumpled sheets of music paper and instruments gathering dust, was a testament to his grand ambitions and his equally grand failures. His patrons were losing patience, his creditors growing louder. He sought inspiration in the city's forgotten corners, in the dusty antique shops that seemed to hoard the echoes of other, more disciplined eras. In one such establishment, the Antiquarian's Rest, run by a stooped, whispering man named Mr. Silas Blackwood, a name that seemed to resonate with the faint metallic scent of old coins and older bargains that he first encountered the metronome. It was unlike any metronome Julian had ever seen, crafted from a dark, almost black wood that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. Its brass fittings were ornate, depicting intertwined serpents devouring their own tails. The pendulum was a slender, needle-like spike of polished steel. Instead of the usual tempo markings, allegro, andante, adagio, its face was etched with a series of cryptic symbols, reminiscent of alchemical signs or forgotten constellations. The maestro's measure, Blackwood had rasped, his voice like the dry rustle of ancient parchment, an instrument of singular focus. It has guided many a great work to completion, but it demands a certain dedication, shall we say, from the artist. It sets a rhythm not easily broken. Julian, captivated by its somber beauty and the almost palpable aura of power it exuded, felt a desperate hope ignite within him. This, perhaps, was the discipline he lacked, the unwavering guide that could channel his chaotic genius. The price was considerable, but Blackwood, with a thin, knowing smile, offered an arrangement. Back in his apartment, Julian placed the metronome on his battered piano. With a trembling hand, he set the pendulum in motion. It did not tick with the familiar, reassuring click of an ordinary metronome. Instead, it emitted a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within his bones, and the needle-like pendulum swung with a hypnotic, unwavering precision. He sat at his piano and began to play, his fingers finding the keys as if guided by an unseen hand. The fragmented melodies that had tormented him for years began to coalesce, to find structure, to flow with a power and coherence he had never before achieved. He composed for hours, lost in a trance, the metronome's relentless pulse driving him onward. His unfinished symphony, the lament of lost souls, began to pour out of him, a work of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. The metronome did more than just keep time for his music. It began to dictate the rhythm of his entire existence. When he set it to a rapid tempo, presto, as one of the strange symbols seemed to suggest, his days became a blur of frenetic activity. He barely ate or slept, driven by a manic energy to compose, his thoughts racing, his heart pounding in time with the metronome's frantic pulse. The city outside his window seemed to move in slow motion compared to the accelerated reality within his small apartment. Conversely, if he set it to a slower marking, largo desolato, for example, time itself seemed to stretch and warp. The world outside would rush by, while Julian moved as if through molasses, his thoughts sluggish, his body heavy, capable only of composing music of profound, agonizing slowness. He realized, with a dawning horror, that the metronome was not merely guiding his music, it was consuming his life. After each intense bout of composition, he would be left utterly drained, his vitality sapped, his reflection in the mirror showing a man aging with unnatural speed. The dark wood of the metronome seemed to gleam with a sated light, and the strange symbols on its face would sometimes appear to shift, to rearrange themselves into new, even more unsettling configurations. He tried to stop using it, to smash it, to cast it out, but when the metronome was silent, his musical inspiration vanished. His mind would become a chaotic jumble of noise. His hands would tremble uselessly over the piano keys, and the metronome itself seemed to resist. He would find it back on his piano, its pendulum swinging gently as if waiting. Its low hum, a siren song he could not ignore. It had a will of its own. His symphony grew, movement by magnificent, disturbing movement. It was a work of genius, undoubtedly, but it was a dark, tormented genius, its melodies echoing with the sound of lost souls and the relentless, unforgiving passage of time. His few remaining friends, alarmed by his spectral appearance and obsessive behavior, tried to intervene, but Julian, lost in the thrall of his creation and its infernal conductor, pushed them away. He was nearing the end of The Lament of Lost Souls. Only the final, cataclysmic movement remained. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that completing it would demand the ultimate price. But the symphony, his dark, terrible child, had to be birthed. He set the metronome to its fastest, most frenzied marking, a symbol that resembled a spiraling abyss. The hum intensified, filling the room, shaking the very foundations of his sanity. He began to compose, his fingers flying over the keys, the music a torrent of sound and fury, a descent into madness and despair. Days and nights blurred into a single, continuous, high-pitched scream of creative agony. His body wasted away, his eyes burned with a feverish light, but the music, the sweet music, the music poured forth, a river of molten genius. As he penned the final, crashing chord, as the last note of his terrible masterpiece echoed into silence, the needle-like pendulum of the maestro's measure gave one final, shuddering swing, and then stopped, perfectly still, pointing directly at a symbol that resembled a stylized, silent scream. Julian Ross slumped over the piano, his life force utterly extinguished, a hollow husk from which the music had been brutally extracted. His symphony lay complete, a monument to his ambition and his damnation. When they found him, days later, a serene, almost beatific smile was frozen on his lips. The maestro's measure stood silent on the piano, its dark wood gleaming, its cryptic symbols seeming to hold a faint, triumphant glow. The only sound in the room was the rustle of the completed score, as if the notes themselves were sighing with a terrible final satisfaction. Julian Ross had finally completed his magnum opus. He had achieved the immortality he craved, his name forever linked to The Lament of Lost Souls. But the cadence that had driven his genius had also been the rhythm of his own meticulously measured demise. The maestro had taken its final bow, and its price, as always, was the soul of the artist, played out to the last silent beat. And so our trio of tales comes to a close. The threads have been woven, the knots tied, and the whispers have fallen silent. What you make of them now is your own. A bit of uncanny to sweeten your coffee, a chill to cut through the warmth of the late hour. Look around. The night is a little older now, the shadows a little longer. That stranger in the corner, the one you didn't notice before, what story do they carry? What little impossibilities are brewing just beneath the surface of their own quiet reality? But the dawn is not far off, and with it comes the familiar world. As you step back out into the sleeping streets, take a piece of the strange with you. Let it be a reminder that beneath the humdrum of the everyday, just on the other side of a cafe window on a late night, the world is weirder and more wonderful than you know. Thank you for listening. Steve Stockton's Night Cafe is always open for those who seek it. Travel safely now, friends, and try not to be too surprised by what you find waiting for you in the quiet hours ahead.